So, time has come to talk about Shadow Tower Abyss. And for those of you who don't know, Shadow Tower Abyss is a game I've been planning to play for a while. I actually played the original Shadow Tower, but couldn't get much into it due to its slowness. I swear, the game ran at 20 FPS. This game though, it's a different story, despite having its set of issues as well. It's still a must play by lovers of the genre. Shadow Tower Abyss is a first-person dungeon crawler, much in the same vein as its counterpart, Kingsfield. However, with a darker tone. Think Dark Souls to Bloodborne and you would get a similar parallel between Kingsfield and Shadow Tower, one being more medieval in nature and more fantasy, while the other being darker and broodier and more horror themed. Shadow Tower Abyss was developed by From Software and came out in 2001 for the PlayStation 2 exclusively in Japan. This was due to the abysmal sales of the title, reportedly only selling 12,908 units in Japan in its first week. In later years, people have given it a deeper appreciation since it was one of the games that inspired the Souls games to come. I must preface that I played the game using the most up-to-date version of the emulator PCSX2, and with no save states or any additional feature provided by the emulator that are outside of the game's own scope. I use save stations and reloading the save on death, mechanics that are part of the game itself, as I wanted to experience the game as the developers intended. Emulation of this title though isn't perfect, as there are some graphical glitches, namely some Z-fighting if you're using anything other than software rendering. This is what I used, so forgive me if in most gameplay footage the resolution is towards the lower end. In Shadow Tower Abyss, you play as a nameless protagonist that a guide led into the ruins of the Citadel, the entrance to the Shadow Tower. Once inside, your goal is to climb the tower and escape. The game is exclusively played in the first-person perspective, where you explore the tower, fight enemies with different weapons, magic, and equipment. The game features a wide range of weapons and equipment that you would expect from a fantasy RPG, such as swords, daggers, staves, and varied medieval armors. What sets Shadow Tower apart is its inclusion of modern-day weaponry into the mix, ranging from old-style revolvers to full-on military assault rifles, which I found to be pretty cool. It gives it a very unique aesthetic, as I am not aware of many games that incorporate these two elements so openly. Can you imagine yourself in full knight's armor while rocking a grenade launcher? That is pretty cool to me. In the game, you usually have 4 different attacks: 2 slash attacks, swinging your weapon from left to right or right to left, pierce attack, pretty much a poke, and a break attack, which is an overhead swing. Different weapons do more damage with certain kinds of attacks, as well some enemies taking more damage with other kinds of attacks, which is something to take into consideration when playing. And let me just say, the game offers several control button layouts, but I found control type 4 to be the most optimal, as this allows you to pretty much enable a modern first-person control scheme, where you use the left analog to walk and strafe, and the right stick to look around, while the triggers and bumpers bear different attacks you can perform, making the game much more intuitive to play. Another cool thing, the game features an enemy dismembered system, way before games like the popular Dead Space, where if you actually cut different parts of the enemy off, they will behave differently, sometimes for your benefit, like cutting the arm of a humanoid enemy using a weapon, leaving them incapable of attacking effectively. Or for your detriment. I noticed that once I cut off the head of a burly alien looking dude and he started swinging his weapon madly, becoming even more dangerous in the process. The game also features magic, however, I didn't really care about it when I had one of these. But in all seriousness, you can equip rings that basically give you spells. These range from fireballs to ice pillars on the floor or acid balls thrown at your enemies. They're cool and all, and I actually use the acid balls for a while as a way to stagger enemies before walking them good, but with guns you don't need this. Shadow Tower, Abyss, you have plenty of stats that you can level up. Stamina, Vitality, Strength, Dexterity, Magic, Concentration, Mentality and Mind. There are too many stats in my opinion, and the game does not make it very clear what each of these do. I had to search online, which wasn't easy since this is a relatively niche game. However, I found a game facts page that explains them, but I still think it's not 100% accurate. And for example, Stamina controls your HP and carry weight? Shouldn't Vitality be the one that determines HP instead of Stamina? Vitality also increases allegedly the amount of times you can hit an enemy before you run out of attack orbs. Alright, I didn't explain that. Pretty much to attack, you have these orbs on the top left of the screen that correspond to how many hits you can make with the equipped weapon in succession before needing to wait for this to recover before attacking again. A lighter weapon has more of these orbs, while a heavier one has less. Vitality is set to increase these. However, for most of my playthrough I put points in Vitality and I never noticed it increasing. There are plenty of these examples, including the magic attributes. Fuck if I know what they do. But to be honest, I didn't bother much with those since by the end I was a knight toting shotguns and grenade launchers. And even Strength in the Game Facts article mentions it increasing break and slash resistance as well as slightly HP and carry capacity. No mention of increasing damage of certain weapons, nothing. Also, I never noticed increasing my carry capacity. All these can be attributed to maybe the Game Facts article not being accurate or the translation for the game not being so good. When it comes to carry capacity, I gotta say, this game showers you with equipment, and if you're not careful, you will be over-encumbered at one point or another. Being over-encumbered makes you slower to move, and it drains your health if you're past a certain threshold. This state can be very dangerous. Get this, you can pick up items off the floor, but you can't get rid of them unless you find a shop where you can sell them. And if you're over-encumbered enough, you start taking health damage, as I said before. You can see how this can become a less than ideal situation and lead to your death. Thankfully, I never died from this, but it certainly contributed to some tense situations where I had to waste heal potions while I frantically went through dungeons trying to find a place to sell some equipment. The way to play the game, at least for me, is pick up new weapons / equipment, use it until it breaks, then just sell it. Chances are you're never gonna run out of equipment since the game is constantly giving you stuff. There are places where you can repair the equipment in exchange for health, but unless it's a really good weapon that you really like, it isn't worth it. As I said before, by the end I managed to only use guns, since with all the equipment I sold I could buy plenty of ammo, which was cool I admit. Shift of gameplay style I think definitely helped to keep the experience fresh throughout. Although it is not required to go full guns, you can keep using swords and more traditional weapons since they do plenty of damage. It was purely a personal choice. Leveling up supposedly works by the game automatically increasing your stats depending on the enemies you kill. Which is something I didn't really notice, to be honest. More concretely though, sometimes you find some variation of normal enemies that have a darker tinge. Killing these usually drops soul pods, an usable item that allows you to allocate points to whatever attribute you want. This leveling system is kinda meh in my opinion. I would prefer something more akin to Dark Souls, where you would gain souls from defeated enemies and attribute your stat points as you please. Overall though, the gameplay of the game is simple, fun and straight to the point, despite stat and leveling up things not being too good.
暗い密林の奥で一人の老人に導かれた男は 荒れ果てた祠を目にした。崩れた石積みにうがたれた穴の向こうにはただ闇だけが広がっていた。穴の中へと足を踏み入れる男の背後で老人はかすかに笑みを浮かぶ。
Game story is pretty sparse. You pretty much get the intro cutscene explaining the premise, you being a dude lured into the tower / abyss by some old guy, being stuck there and needing to explore it to find a way out. Along the line, finding mystical spear wielded by an ancient king that brought peace to all the lands. So yeah, after you are let loose in the first level of the abyss, while your torch runs out and your eyes slowly adjust to the darkness, from that point on, the plot is pretty non-existent. You explore, gear up, progress in the abyss levels and fight enemies and bosses. You get some inklings of lore from random NPCs you find, but not much. And when game tries to have a story, it's mostly nonsensical. You also find that I keep referring to the tower as abyss and vice versa. The game doesn't make it very clear if you're exploring an abyss or a tower, as its architecture is very alien among the structure not being very clear. However, you keep going up as you explore, which is kind of weird to me as well, since you came from the outside and fell into the ruins, so it's very weird how you would start at the bottom of the abyss. One would imagine that a drop that high would kill you, so a tower would make more sense. So, some spoiler things now that I think are worth discussing. You never really find the King's Spear. It's got game telling you it's part of your journey. Unless the spear is this? You never get it, it just shatters, which is a shame since it would be nice in such a combat focused game to be able to get it and use it, you know, some actual ludo-narrative sonance? I don't know what to say, but you know, when actually the gameplay and the story are connected, so it would be nice. Also, the game ends very abruptly. You just beat another area like any other, climb some stairs and fight a heart in the ceiling without it being very challenging, and the game then just ends. Very sudden and anticlimactic. So yeah, you're not gonna be playing Shadow Tower Abyss for the story. The gameplay is all that matters. I am a fan of the game's look. It's very somber and dark, but with decent variety. It definitely doesn't fall in the pitfall of many other dungeon crawlers I played, where the areas just look and feel the same, being very square in design, with it seeming like the only thing that changes between areas are the wall and floor textures. Here, this is not the case. For each area, there is a distinct unique feel to it, and despite you being exploring an abyss, it doesn't mean it's all dark caves. You get areas like underground forests, factory-like spaces, some spaceship type areas, as well as some outdoor areas. Each area has its own design quirks. The factory style area is more square, reminiscent of more traditional dungeon crawlers. While in this peak-like area there are a lot of flying enemies, and it's all about fighting them without falling from high ledges and relatively tight walkways. There is an underwater outside area with waterfalls where you spend time exploring outside of water and inside, etc. There are also plenty of other striking locations, for example when you ride the boat that leads you to the entrance of the abyss. As well as some interesting environmental details that add to the world, like in the insect layer you find a rivalry between flying insects and crawling insects. They fight each other, and you can also see some crawling insects carrying a dead flying one back to their lair. Overall, there is plenty of visual and level design variety to enjoy. Overall, the game is definitely fun and worth a play despite its convoluted stats, leveling system and its other shortcomings. It's a fun game through and through that doesn't lose itself in endless movie-like plot or subsistence like many modern games. The game also feels pretty chunky to play, and the dismembered mechanic is pretty fun. Let me remind you that this game came out in 2003, 5 years before Dead Space, the game that became known for this mechanic. Let that sit in. Something else pretty impressive, for me at least, is that I wasn't bored of it by the end, which is pretty rare to me. So, if not for the other things, that is an achievement. It's a game with zero fluff, straight to the point, you can beat it in around 11 hours, and nothing feels bloated. A tight experience and definitely worth your time.